Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
May I proceed?
Please do.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Appleby.
Good morning.
Yesterday, we were talking about the June 6th progress meeting with the city, and we're going to go back to that now. Registrar, can you bring up CIM 103, please? Slide 22. Thank you. Mr. Appleby, this is the presentation that we were looking at yesterday that was delivered at that meeting. So we're in June at the first progress meeting. SEMA has done some analysis of the collision history at this point. Is that right?
Yes, that appears to be correct. Yes.
In the presentation, there's a number of points about signage and other things and markings that are raised. I'm not going to take you to those, but I do note that the presentation specifically notes the Mud Street on-ramp, which SEMA calls ramp 6. Do you remember the reason why the Mud Street ramp in particular was identified in this early presentation?
I believe there was information from the start of the project from the city itself that this was a ramp that they were had concerns with in the past and had done some signage changes to, and they wanted us to obviously include it in the review, but also to evaluate the changes that had been made to see if it had had any impact. I guess there had been what they were considering a significant number of collisions associated with this particular ramp.
And at this stage, what had your analysis revealed about whether the countermeasures that the city had already put in place had resulted? Let me try that again. What had you found at that point about those countermeasures?
I believe that we reviewed the collisions. Obviously we had the historical collisions the same as they had. We identified that there were a number of collisions at this location, and I believe we reviewed the countermeasures that had been put in place and identified that perhaps there was more that could be done. There was nothing. I don't believe there was anything wrong with what had been done, but there may be a few extra additional items that we had noted could be completed to help augment, I guess, what had been completed by the city.
Thank you. Registrar, can you go to slide 23? It's image 23, the next image. So here, this is still in respect of ramp 6, and SEMA's presentation indicates that speed management treatments further in advance of the curve. So to slow down earlier, is that right?
Correct, that's right, yes.
And then there's a reference to innovative treatments, potentially including pavement markings, signage, and high friction pavement surface treatment. I'm going to ask you about that last one. What is a high friction pavement surface treatment that was being recommended here?
I don't have the specific expertise with respect to that, but my understanding is that it's something that can be added to the surface of the asphalt itself that improves the friction value of the asphalt. So it adds more friction, it adds more grit, or some other manner of adding friction to the asphalt surface itself.
Okay. Who on your team had suggested this as a potential countermeasure?
I don't recall specifically, but yeah, I don't recall specifically who would have identified that.
Okay. Registrar, could you bring up CIM 8423, please? And could you call out the fifth paragraph. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, the third paragraph from the bottom. Sorry, that took me a moment. City okay with. So this is the notes of that same meeting. Seem okay with examining high friction pavement on ramps. However, mainline has a different new pavement that may not be recommended to be overlaid with high friction. At this point, was SEMA considering recommending high friction pavement applications on any part of the main line?
I don't specifically remember, but given this note, I would assume that the discussion was had about high friction pavements or overlays for in general in the study area. And then this clarification was provided to us by the city.
Do you recall who from the city provided you with this clarification?
Not specifically, no.
Do you recall any further information provided by the city about the different new pavement?
No, I just recall that there was some discussion, basically what it says here, that there had been a non-typical, I guess, for Hamilton streets anyway, pavement asphalt used on the actual Red Hill itself, and that they were not prepared to change it at that time. They were watching to see how it progressed through time, and it wasn't something that they wanted to have changed at this point. It was, my recollection was fairly generic discussion, no specifics. Frankly, I only learned about the specific of it after preparing for this. I don't recall any of that discussion myself.
Okay. Registrar, leaving this up with the call out if possible, can you also bring up OD chapter 6, page 28, paragraph 58? Thank you. It was Registrar. Yeah, exactly. And if you can call it 58 for me, please. Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Robertson, one of your colleagues, when you circulated the initial version of these minutes, changed the word may in the call out above. Changed this from from would to may. That is, however, the main line has different new pavement that would not be recommended for an overlay. Change it to may not be. Did you discuss this proposed change with Mr. Robertson?
I don't remember any specific discussion about that, no.
Did you have any views about his change?
I can't recall if I did, and if the word was changed back to would or may. Yeah, I don't recall any specific issue with that or discussion about it, to be honest.
Did that change in language matter to your future work?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think the word may and the word would could be interchangeable in this context. Wood's a little bit more of a positive than may. I don't know that it changed anything as far as my work was concerned in this.
Okay, Registrar, you can take that down. And if you could call up HAM 51991. So this is the next progress meeting about a month later on June 3rd, 2013. You see that you attended with some individuals from the city and some of your colleagues. You see that?
I do, yes.
Do you remember this meeting?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. Registrar, can you call up as the other image ham 51990, please? You'll see in the second paragraph of the meeting minutes, it says BA introduced presentation. Am I correct in interpreting that as you introduced the presentation and it's the presentation that's attached?
Correct, yes.
Great. Did you create this slide deck?
I'm not sure if I did. Oftentimes these slide decks were created by the technical team. And what I might have assisted or put it together, but I don't think it would have been typical for me to create the entire thing, no.
Okay. Registrar, can you go to image 2 of 990, please? So there's a recap of findings. That's the same findings that you had reported in the earlier progress meeting. Is that right?
That looks similar, yes.
Registrar, can you go to image 3, please? Some of this presentation includes a summary of the enhanced interchange safety analyst tool and explaining what that was. Were you involved in generating the information using this tool?
No, I wouldn't have been involved in that. I'm not sure how to use that tool.
Do you understand how to interpret results coming out of that tool?
At a very high level, yes, but that was not my expertise.
Registrar, can you go to image 9 of 990, please? Thank you. So I'm not going to take you through all of this presentation, but am I correct that it reflects SEMA's initial conclusions as to this point on the various segments of the main line and on the ramps?
Yes, that this is Dartnell 3, 4, and 5, which I believe are segments of the highway around that area, correct?
Yeah. And just using this as an example, actually, I just want to make sure that you're seeing both parts. Registrar, can you go up one image on there? Thank you. So just to start at the beginning of the findings for these segments. So there's a collision review with reference to 48% of the collisions are a single motor vehicle. Was that included because that was notable?
Yes, I would think so, yes.
And then there's a geometry review, which is about the length of the speed change.
Yep, that's what it looks like, yes.
Registrar, can you go back to the next image, please? And there's continuing on the geometry review, and then you put in some potential countermeasures. So I'm not going to ask you about the specific ones there, but looking at the right-hand side, at this point in the process, had SEMA completed the cost-benefit analysis?
It appears that we had at least done an initial run of the cost-benefit, yes.
And at this point, you're not actually giving monetary numbers for cost. You're just giving low, medium, high. Is that right?
Yes, that's what it looks like. Absolutely. Yep.
And is that standard to stage and the process like this to give your client a sense of cost rather than specific amounts?
In a larger project like this, yes, it would be more typical until we had final costs, perhaps from the client themselves, but also to ensure that, we're going in the right direction and not spending too much time on the nitty-gritty details of costing items.
Okay. Registrar, can you go to the next image in 990, please? So you'll see one of the potential countermeasures is pavement friction surface testing / improve pavement friction through high friction pavement. You see that?
I do, yes.
So we're talking about a mainline segment here. Can you explain why SEMA included testing / improve pavement friction for this mainline segment?
I would assume that it was because of the findings of the collision review identifying wet weather, runoff road, or single motor vehicle collisions.
Okay. Registrar, could you bring up the 5th paragraph of the meeting minutes, please? So you'll see here in the minutes, again, a comment to not include high friction pavement countermeasure on the main line due to the specialized nature of existing pavement. So, was that a direction from the city?
It certainly looks that way, yes.
Okay, Registrar, can you move the call out down just a little? Thank you. So here you have the, am I correct that that / on the potential countermeasure is an alternative, 2 different alternatives, friction testing or improved pavement friction?
Well, the pavement surface friction testing actually isn't a countermeasure, it's a study.
Mhm.
So I think they are not maybe but they're 2 different things that sort of point in the same direction. One is to understand what the friction level is currently, and the other would be actually changing the friction of the pavement. They could be done independently of each other, but yes, they're similar, but one is not a countermeasure, the other is.
Okay. Was SEMA's recommendation at this point to do them concurrently?
It certainly appears that way. It doesn't specify there, so.
Okay. And you don't have a recollection today?
I can't say for certain, no.
Okay. At the meeting, did anyone explain what they meant by where it says due to specialized nature of existing pavement? And then did they explain what they meant by ongoing monitoring?
I don't specifically remember that, no. Only, again, the general discussion around, it was a different type of asphalt for them that I guess they hadn't used before, and that they were keeping an eye on it as it aged, but nothing specific. I don't recall.
Thank you. Registrar, can you go to image 29, please? So this is a potential countermeasure, and it says at the top 4 freeways and ramps. And at this point, what was SEMA's preliminary conclusions in respect to full illumination?
It appears based on this that full illumination was warranted based on TAC and MTO on ramps and freeway sections.
And on the right-hand side, where there's the CFM, and then there's benefit and cost. Is it fair to say that SEMA had commenced the benefit cost analysis by this meeting?
Yes, it appears at a very high level that had been done.
Registrar, can you close the call out on image 991? And can you, this might be more difficult to do. Can you call out can you bring up, can you close image 990? bring up the second page of image 991 so that we have image 1 and image 2 of 991 up? Thank you. And then can you call out 4 costs at the bottom? And then as it extends to the next page. Thank you. So on costs, the minutes reflect SEMA will include illumination recommendations in the report. Did you understand that included the recommendation we were just looking at for full illumination of the freeway and the ramps?
At this point, I would assume I did, yes.
You don't have a recollection either way?
No, I don't.
If you'd received some other direction from the city at this point, would that have affected your work going forward?
I'm not sure it would have affected our work going forward, other than we may have made an adjustment, which we ended up doing to the report itself, and to the final a recommendation based on information that we received. But at this point, I don't think that we had received any clarification one way or the other. At least it doesn't appear to be.
Okay. Maybe I'll put it differently. If you'd received direction to limit your assessment of illumination, is it fair to say you wouldn't have done more work on the aspect that had been limited?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Okay. It says MF indicated that SEMA should use MTO costing information. Is MF Mike Fields?
Yes.
And am I correct that MTO costing information is slightly different than TAC costing information?
So I don't know that TAC has costing information. MTO, I think the direction here was related to using MTO costs for highway illumination rather than city costs for highway illumination. Most likely because the city doesn't typically install the type of lighting that you would install on a freeway type design. MTO does, and so they have a more robust costing setup that you could utilize.
Okay. And that's for the special kinds of lights that are on freeways and how far apart they're spaced, that sort of thing?
Correct, yes. It's often high mass lighting versus your typical street lighting that you would have on a city street.
Okay. And those are more expensive?
Yes.
Okay. Registrar, you can close this this image, please. You can bring up OD chapter 6, page 35, paragraph 75, please. So you sent a copy of the PowerPoint presentation we were just looking at to city staff and to Dr. Hadiagi for review and comment. Do you remember that?
I don't specifically remember sending it, but I did.
Okay. You also sent it to Mr. Kirchhoff at the city?
Correct, yes, he was copied on that. So.
Registrar, can you close that call out and call out 76, please? Do you recall receiving this email from Mr. Kirchhoff that references regarding the mainline pavement treatment? City's asset management has retained Golder Associates to oversee all testing and monitoring. Please contact Ludimir directly if you require further information about weight in motion or friction testing on the main line. Do you remember receiving this email?
I don't remember receiving that specifically, no.
Did you have any contact with Golder in 2013?
I did not.
To the best of your knowledge, did anyone at SEMA have contact with Golder at this time?
To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe so.
To the extent that you have recollection, what did you understand this message to mean?
Well, I understand this message to mean that simply Golder had been retained by the city to do the monitoring that I assume was referenced in those meetings, the ongoing monitoring, and that they could undertake friction testing and weight and motion testing as part of that work.
Did you understand this to be a direction to contact Golder?
No, definitely not.
Did you receive any test results or data from Golder in 2013?
I did not know.
To your knowledge, did anyone at SEMA?
I don't believe so, no.
Did you have any discussions with staff at the city about Golder's retainer?
I don't recall having any discussions, no.
Before the 2013 SEMA report was finalized, did anyone at the city tell you that Golder had arranged for friction testing to be performed on the Red Hill?
Nobody had told me that, no.
Thank you, Registrar. You can close this. And if you can open up CIM 369, the native version, please. While that is coming up, is the drafting of SEMA consultation reports, are they a collaborative process amongst SEMA staff?
For a report of this nature, they would definitely be collaborative, yes.
There's a different people are drafting different parts and then someone is compiling it all together and making sure it flows?
Correct, yeah. Each of the technical specialties would effectively create their section, and then somebody would put it together in a final document, yes.
Registrar, can you go to internal page 3, which is page 9 of 59? Can you make that a bit smaller? All right, so that's internal page 9. Can you go to internal page 3? Thank you. I will try to figure out the best way to give those directions for native files. Mr. Appleby, this is the study scope. And this reflected the scope as you understand it at the time when you were finalizing this draft?
I would say yes.
Including the bullet point review of illumination?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and you'll see on the right-hand side, there is a note from Brian Malone. So just to orient you, this version is the version that you sent to Mr. Malone and Dr. Hadiagi for comment before it went out.
Okay.
So there's a note here from Mr. Malone, must add context of lighting. This was another element that we restricted by the EA and is out of scope. Do you see that?
I do see that, yes.
Okay. Registrar, can you go to page 17, please? Down at the bottom, Mr. Appleby, can you read this? We can't do the same sort of call outs where it says illumination results.
Yeah, I can read that.
Okay, so the first sentence is the full illumination justification was completed for 3 interchanges, Dartnell Road, Mud Street, and Green Hill Avenue, as well as for the entire study area. And that was the work that that summarizes the work that SEMA had done up to this point.
Yes, that would be correct.
Registrar, can you go to the next page, please? The very last paragraph says based on the TAC warrant, continuous full illumination is suggested for the whole study area. You see that?
Yes,
The
yes.
last sentence of the first paragraph.
I see that, yes.
Thank you. And Registrar, can you click on where it says area, where it's highlighted? Right up at the top, the last sentence of the first paragraph. The very last word. Apologies, Registrar. Do you want me to try that direction again? In the last sentence of the first paragraph, based on the TAC warrant. There we go. If you can click on that, or if you can highlight, I just want to show the comment that is attached to that. Mr. Appleby, can you see how the second of the comments from Dr. Hedayagi has now been moved over just to show that those are connected?
I do see that, yes.
Great. And he says, shouldn't we talk about the environmental constraint? Didn't we get a report that highlights that we cannot do full lighting? Had you received any report that highlighted that we cannot do full lighting?
I don't recall receiving any report at this point. No, I don't, not specifically.
Okay. Did you receive a report at any time that highlighted that, quote unquote, we cannot do full lighting?
I think SEMA may have received something from the EA that was originally done from Laura Consulting or somebody like that. But I don't know when we may have received that or where that may have come from. I recall seeing it in the materials in preparation, but I don't recall specifically getting it.
Okay. Do you recall receiving something like that while you were an employee of SEMA?
I don't recall that, no.
Okay. So just so it's clear, so you, in your mind, looking back at this time in 2013, maybe I'll say it like this, in respect of the finalization of this 2013 report, do you recall receiving a report that highlighted that we cannot do full lighting?
I don't recall receiving that report, no.
Okay. And if you could just scroll the other comments that Mr. Malone makes, the next comment. There we go. Thank you, Registrar. Do you see that where it says at the least, we must follow this conclusion with a recognition that the achievement of warrant does not mean that they are being recommended. They need to be assessed in relation to approvals constraints.
I do see that, yes.
Was this information about these approval constraints, was that new information to you when you received these comments?
I assume it would have been, yes. Certainly.
You don't remember?
I don't remember specifically, but.
Registrar, can you go to page 36, please? Sorry, page 37, please. Thank you. And then here it says, similarly, under the illumination 6.1.1, that the illumination, pardon me, the outcome of the TAC illumination warrant indicated that full illumination of the corridor and ramps is justified. So when you say corridor here, is that the main line?
Yes, that would represent the main line.
Okay. And then the next paragraph, benefit cost ratio, the calculated benefit would be a reduction of 48.5 collisions over a 5-year period, and at a cost of 1.69 million. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So by this point, SEMA had actually done the complete costing using the MTO cost information?
It certainly appears that way, yes.
Okay. Can you close this out, Registrar, and open up OD, page 37, paragraph 82. Thank you. So Mr. Malone provided comments. Those were the comments we were just looking at. In his email where he enclosed those comments back to you, he said, we need to discuss the lighting. Is it in scope or not? As written, it's a hand grenade that will go off in the city's hands. Actually, it might be easier if we actually go to the document. Can you go to HAM? Sorry, it's not HAM. CIM 8124. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. SEMA 8129, please. Thank you. So you see that in the middle of this page, there's a reference to the email that I just read out.
I see that.
And then your response is at the top. I believe it was in scope, but I don't recall receiving anything from Mike that would act as a quote unquote out. Apparently there was a report. Maurice, did you receive this? Did you get anything from Maurice or any report in response to this email?
I don't recall receiving anything from Maurice or anyone else in response to this. No.
Okay. Did you have discussions with Mr. Malone about what he meant in his question about whether it was in scope and his comment, it's a hand grenade?
I don't remember having any discussions with Mr. Malone about this, no.
Registrar, can you now go to 8124, please? So the email we were just looking at was Friday, July 26, and now we're looking at an email from Monday, July 29. And this is an email from you to Mr. Nolet, where you say, we are going to remove the overall lighting from the report. Overall lighting, that's mainline lighting?
Yeah, it's poorly worded, but I believe that's what it was in reference to, yes.
So what happened from that email with Mr. Malone and the comments that he sent you on Friday and this email to Mr. Nolet on Monday that led you to tell Mr. Nolet that we were going to remove the overall lighting?
I don't recall specifically, but I guess I took it as direction, whether there was a discussion that I don't recall or whether I took it as direction from the email exchange that what's quoted here as overall lighting wasn't going to be included in the report. It was going to be for the ramps.
Okay. Did you speak to anybody at the city over the weekend to clarify the scope?
I wouldn't have spoke to anyone over the weekend at the city, no.
Okay, well, maybe that Monday morning.
I don't recall speaking to anybody. This is at 8:12 in the morning, so I very highly doubt that I spoke to anybody on Monday morning about that.
Okay, maybe I'll just ask the question a little bit more broadly. Between receiving Mr. Malone and Dr. Hadiagi's comments and then sending on Friday and then sending this email, did you speak to anybody at the city?
I don't recall speaking to anybody at the city.
And do you recall speaking to Mr. Malone about this?
I don't specifically recall speaking to him either.
Okay, and Dr. Hadiagi?
No.
Okay. Anybody else at SEMA that you spoke to about this?
Not that I recall.
Okay, Registrar, you can take this down, and if you can pull up the native version of CIM 371. And if you could go to page 3, please. Okay, so that's internal page 3. Can you go to page 9, please? There we go. That's properly internal page 3. So you'll see in under scope, it says review of illumination. There's been a track changes addition in specific areas only, i.e. not through the study area. Registrar, could you just hover over that track changes? And that's it. I think you're hovering over it, but I'm not, can you hover over the apologies, Registrar, for my unclear direction. Under study scope at the bottom, the green track changes that say in specific areas only. There we go. So that is your additions at 8:35 on the 29th, on the Monday.
Yes, that is. Yeah.
And was this change reflective of the email in which you said remove overall lighting?
Yes, this would be consistent.
Registrar, can you go to page 20, please? So here you'll see that you've added in at the very last line, the understanding the decision to illuminate was inextricably linked to environmental concerns and approvals. Review of full illumination was not undertaken, but restricted to spot locations. And that's your track changes. Would you agree with me that SEMA actually had done a review of full illumination?
Yes, I would agree with that. The review was done.
So review of full illumination was not undertaken. That's not accurate, is it?
Correct. That's not fully accurate. Yes.
Okay, can you go to page 43, Registrar? And so here you've also deleted the reference to the warrant outcomes and to the benefit cost ratio. You see that?
Yes, under the overall study area. Yes.
And on whose direction did you remove this as a countermeasure?
I don't specifically recall the direction, but I believe it would have been consistent with the other changes that were made after the email received.
The one from Mr. Malone?
I would have to assume yes, that's correct.
Did you have any discussions with Mr. Malone about these changes after you made them?
I don't recall any specific discussion. However, Mr. Malone or Mr. Hediegi would have reviewed this before it went out.
Okay. And when it went out, the deletions we've just looked at, those were in fact deleted, not included. Is that right?
I believe, I would have to check the document, but I believe that that's correct, yes.
Okay. Registrar, can you close this and go to OD, page 45, paragraph 105, please? What's going to come up as a call out that you sent a draft version to city instructing clients. Was it typical for SEMA to send draft versions to its clients?
I would say it was typical, especially on a larger project, yes.
What was the purpose of sharing draft reports?
Well, primarily to ensure that we were providing the client with the scope of the work that we had said we would, and also for them to have a chance to review the proposed countermeasures and other findings, and to provide any feedback that they might have based on that.
Okay. Registrar, can you go to CIM 8113? Thanks. So you'll see at the top of the chain, this is an email from Mr. Cooper to you on August 8. See our comments below. Registrar, can you go to show image 1 and image 2 together? And if you can call out the second bullet on image 2, please. So this is in an email from Mike Field to Mr. Cooper and others at the city, which is then forwarded to you. And Mr. Field says, the illumination of the main line has been excluded. This decision is based upon information that we provided to SEMA. Then he goes on to say the exclusion is not well explained. So just stopping there. Where Mr. Field says this decision was based on information that we provided to SEMA. To your knowledge, what information did the city provide to SEMA that resulted in the illumination of the main line being excluded from the report?
To my knowledge, it would have been the discussions that were had previously at the progress meetings.
We looked at those and there wasn't anything about excluding mainline. There was only a reference to being cautious and is that the reference that you're talking about?
That would have been the reference I was talking about from the city themselves. Like to me.
Okay. So you have those 2 progress meetings and then you complete the draft of the report that includes the full illumination review. Why would you do that if you had thought that the main line was excluded at those progress meetings?
I don't know that information obviously would prepare the report with that full in there. And so the information provided directly to me, as I said, wasn't to necessarily exclude it. That information came later on through those emails and comments that were provided that I would assume have come from the city at that point, from comments made through the drafting of the report.
Okay. So you said the comments made. Do you mean the comments that Mr. Malone and Dr. Hadiegi made in the report?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so that's not from the city.
No, that's not directly from the city.
Okay. So in August 8th, what information did you have from the city that excluded the illumination of the main line, if anything?
I don't believe that I personally had any information from the city at that point.
Okay. Mr. Field goes on to say the exclusion was not well explained. And then he says, considering that illumination of the main line is the first request in the council motion to review, I think there should be far more explanation as to why it was excluded. So at this point in August, having received this email, had you seen a copy of the council motion?
No, I had not, no.
What did you take from this comment from Mr. Field in terms of what far more explanation to add?
I would have taken that we would have needed to expand the text around the exclusion of illumination of the main line.
Okay, let's close this and register. If you can open OD6, page 45, paragraphs 106 and 107. Thanks. So in the next turn of the draft, the excerpt in 106 was added, and the underlined sentence in paragraph 107 was added. I'm not going to take you into those. Was this in response to Mr. Field's request for a better explanation of the exclusion of mainline illumination?
It certainly seems to be, yes.
The first paragraph in the first sentence in 106, however, as noted, illumination of the mainline section of the Red Hill or the Arch VP was not examined for this study. You'll agree with me that's not an accurate statement as to SEMA's work?
Correct, yes.
Why did you include that statement in that, using that language?
I can't recall why I specifically did that. I would agree that it's poorly worded and not fully accurate, but why it was worded that way, I can't say.
Okay, it's not fully accurate. It's not accurate at all, is it?
No, it was looked at.
Okay. Registrar, can you go to paragraph 119 of the same OD? So we've gone through a couple of drafts to the city now, and you completed another round of comments in September. Just stopping in September, did Mr. Moore, that is Gary Moore, ever contact you to discuss the draft report?
I've never spoken to Mr. Moore, no.
Did you ever come to learn his views of the draft report from anybody else?
No, I did not.
Registrar, can you go to page 61, paragraph 155 of this same document? So in October, you send an updated version of the report where you change some words as well as the text in the body. Just in terms of time, that was in October of 2013. Do you remember sending this particular version in October?
Not specifically, there was a few versions. I don't recall this one specifically, no.
Okay. Did you have any involvement in the preparation of the report that city staff prepared for the Public Works Committee?
No, I didn't.
And is it typical that you don't have that kind of involvement?
Yeah, that would be typical.
Registrar, can you bring up page 70, paragraph 177, please? So this is an email that you are not copied on. It's from Mr. Lupton to Mr. White and Mr. Ferguson. And it says, I reviewed with Gary, and this is, they're speaking about the they're speaking about the staff report that summarizes the SEMA report. And in the third line it says, I'm not asking to change opinions, but to soften and stage the report. And there that references to the SEMA report. Similar to what we have done in our info report, i.e. do this first and measure results. Please sit down with SEMA and make this happen. Please ensure you manage this directly. Did you ever discuss modifying the SEMA report to reflect the city staff report with Mr. Ferguson or Mr. Cooper?
I don't recall specifically discussing that, no.
What about Mr. White?
No, definitely not with Mr. White.
Did you deal with Mr. White at all during the SEMA report?
No, I never dealt with Mr. White, no.
Okay. Registrar, can you bring up page 71, paragraph 181, please? Thank you. Can you actually bring up the next image side by side? Thank you. So Mr. Appleby, you emailed Mr. Cooper in November of 2013. And it says, I attach a Word document to this email that has our suggested wording additions based on our meeting yesterday. Does that refresh your memory about whether you spoke to Mr. Cooper about modifying the SEMA report?
No, it doesn't help, no. But obviously I must have.
Okay. Mr. Cooper says, pardon me, you say to Mr. Cooper, we've avoided using too many actual dates as we feel it could potentially put the city in a liability position if someone were to look back in retrospect and the city had not completed the work by a specific date for whatever reason. This is why we tried to use ranges generally. And then you say, please review. Can you explain your comment about potential liability?
I mean, again, I think it's poorly chosen words, but effectively what trying to say that we didn't want to have specific dates in there that could be problematic, potentially problematic, when in fact, due to the nature of the actual recommendation not being ultra time sensitive, having dates in there might make it appear that way. Also, we can't control, nor do we have any say over or information on their ability to actually do something by a specific date. So time ranges are more typical, the short, the medium, the long term ideas, rather than saying, you need to, do these changes by next Tuesday. I think that it makes it seem like it's more time sensitive than it truly actually is. And therefore, the use of ranges would be more consistent with a report of this nature or in general recommendations.
Okay. And your idea to change it to ranges, the idea to change it to ranges, was that your idea or was that Mr. Cooper's?
I don't specifically recall that. Again, it's a typical thing to do to have ranges, so I potentially could have come from either.
Okay. Can you close that call out? And can you call out 182? Thank you. And so you'll see the revised text that you sent over had signage to be completed end of 2013, early 2014, pavement marking and PRPM recommendations beginning the spring of 2014, and PRPMs installed at the next plan resurfacing in the medium term, and then illumination, undertake illumination of other countermeasures and monitor their effectiveness for a period of at least 1 year. And who came up with those ranges to put into the report?
I can't specifically say who would have come up with those ranges. Could have been a collaborative effort. It could have been SEMA.
I'm going to suggest to you that you received information from the city about when they thought they would do these countermeasures, and then you put them into the report.
Okay.
I'm suggesting, what do you think about that?
I mean, that could be, again, we often work with clients to understand their abilities to undertake work. You know, putting signage in the short term makes sense. Repainting during the annual rehab program in the spring would, again, make sense from an operational perspective, but painting a road perhaps, you know, in the winter isn't a good idea, and therefore it would be done during the spring. Again, all of these types of countermeasures weren't necessarily so time sensitive that they needed to be done, like I said, like the next day or anything like that, that these ranges were reasonable and in line with what could be accomplished in the real world. So again, it's possible that it was a collaborative effort between SEMA and the city, or it could have been suggested by us.
Okay.
I don't
have sorry to interrupt.
No, I was just saying I don't have a specific recollection either way.
Okay. For the illumination recommendations, it says the city will undertake the implementation of other countermeasures and monitor their effectiveness for a period of at least 1 year. I read that now as staging out that recommendation. Would you read that the same way?
I would, yes, I would read that as a staging out of the recommendation to try something first, monitor, and then move forward.
In terms of ranges generally, when you use short-term ranges, what's the usual, when you just say short-term in a recommendation, what does that mean to you in terms of a time frame?
Usually it would be 0 to 3 or 5 years, depending on sort of the overall report itself.
And then you have medium term listed here as 5 to 10 years. Is that your usual range for medium term?
That would be typical, yes.
And then what about long term?
Usually we would say something like 10 plus years.
Okay. For long term, is it fair to say you have to start long term projects much before the 10-year mark in order to complete them by 10 years?
If you want them completed in year 10, often you would have to start them much well before that, yes.
Okay. And if SEMA discovered something that was a significant and urgent safety issue, would SEMA have a professional obligation to put that into a report?
If it was urgent, if it was very urgent, it was something that we found in the field during the course of our investigation, we wouldn't have put it in the report. We would have notified the client, likely by a email or phone call.
Okay, so otherwise you just put short term and that's 0 to 5 whenever a client can get to it?
Yeah, effectively, yes. Anything super urgent wouldn't have been included in here. We would have made it known to them immediately.
Okay. Registrar, can you pull up OD 80 and 81 at the same time, please? So pardon me, yeah, page 80 and 81. So in December, Mr. Cooper responded to your message from November 19th and said, go ahead with the wording changes, instructed you to make them. And then if you go on to page 81, you asked, do you want the date changed on the report to December? It currently says October. And I can't remember if you're going to keep the original date on the report or not. Doesn't matter to me either way. And the report that Mr. Cooper says originally is fine. And then you provide a copy of the report that has your changes suggested in November, finalized in December, but the date on the front page of the report is October 2013. Given CMA's practices at the time, should the date on the cover of the 2013 report been updated to the date it was delivered?
It probably should have been. However, the date isn't or wasn't the full indication that the version had changed. There was an E0X number that would have indicated that it was not the same as the previous one.
Okay, that's something internal to CMA, an identifier that CMA would understand?
It is, and may likely have been understood by others looking at the cover page, but it had an addition number on it.
So if this one was E05, is that the designation you're talking about?
Correct, that's the addition, yes.
Okay. Having delivered the final report, did CMA have, and I should ask this, was this the final report?
I believe that the December E05 was the final report.
Okay, and at the time, was it CMA's practice to actually use the word final on the cover page?
From recollection, I think it varied depending on the client. It wasn't unusual to use it, but it was also not unusual not to put it on there.
Okay. Having delivered the final report, did CMA have any further obligation to the city in respect of this retainer?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Did you have any meaningful involvement in the project that led to the 2015 CMA report?
From my recollection, I think I was involved in a couple of emails early on in the discussion about that particular project. But my recollection is my involvement dropped off relatively quickly, and then I resigned my position on the 31st of July in 2015. And I'm pretty sure after that I wouldn't have had any involvement at all.
Okay. After you resigned, how long did you stay to transition?
I believe it was 3 weeks. I started at the city of St. Catharines on the 24th of August, which I think was 3 weeks later.
Okay. Registrar, can you bring up a CIM 10010? And if you can go to image 2, please. So just to orient you to what this is an email from Golder to Mr. It's an email from Mr. Moore to Mr. Malone, forwarding an email from Golder. And then if you can go to image 1. And then Mr. Malone forwarded it to you. Is that the emails that you were just referencing that you were copied on? This is August 7th of 2015.
Yeah, I see this.
Were these you said I was involved in some early emails? Was this the extent of the emails that you were involved in?
Sorry, I see I was involved in this. No, this was not what I was referencing. I believe there was some discussion about the actual scope of the 2015 report that I had some, again, very preliminary involvement in that I recall.
Okay. For these emails, can you go back down to image 2, please? They're about friction numbers on the Red Hill. That's the subject line. Why did Mr. Malone copy you on, why did you receive these emails, if you know?
I don't know. I'm not sure why, especially given the date.
Do you have any particular expertise in friction testing?
I don't have any expertise in friction testing, no.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Commissioner, Commissioner, it's 10:40, recognizing it's a little early for our morning break, but we are only sitting for the morning today. May I propose that we take a break? I can confer with council and then we can provide a sense of the rest of the morning for you.
That would be fine. Let's take a 15-minute break and we'll return then at 5 to 11.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Appleby, I actually had one more set of questions before I am done. Registrar, can you bring up HAM 41871? Thank you. And we're going to internal page 20, image page 26. Sorry, that was not the right image page. Can you skip forward to internal page 20? You're on page 13 now. Maybe you can't do that. And one more. Thank you. And if you can call it the first, no, actually just leave it. Mr. Appleby, turning to the first paragraph. This is the paragraph that I took you to in the overview document that had been added in this last version, E05. Remember that discussion that we just had?
I do, yes.
Did you personally draft this paragraph that was added?
Don't recall if I personally added that or not.
There are two footnotes in that paragraph, footnote 12 and footnote 13, and you'll see at the bottom they're referenced as the Red Hill Valley Impact and Design Process and the Red Hill Valley Public Consultation Report from Laura Consulting.
Yes.
Where did SEMA obtain those two referred documents from?
I don't specifically recall if we were provided them from the client or if they are publicly available by Googling them. I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you recall personally looking at those two documents?
I don't specifically recall looking at them. No.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Those are my questions.
Okay.
I'm advised by my friends that Dufferin and the ministry do not have any questions, that Golder estimates 15 minutes and that the city estimates 45.
Okay. Then why don't we proceed with Ms. Roberts?
Good morning. Mr. Appleby, I'm Jennifer Roberts. I'm counsel to Golder.
Good morning.
Commissioner, may I proceed?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Appleby, I just want to, there's just a small framework of evidence I just want to go through with you. Am I right in recalling that you were the project manager for the 2013 SEMA report?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I just want to go through the process by which SEMA finalized its reports. Can we please go to overview document 6, image 71, paragraph 181? So my friend, Ms. Lawrence, just took you to this. This is finalizing the SEMA report, and this is the point at which you're putting in some date ranges. So I think if I'm understanding this process, this is one of the very last revisions to the report. Is that right?
Based on the date, yes, it definitely seems that way.
Okay. And you've taken comments and you're incorporating them in the final version. So that's what's happening here?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Can we please go to image 77? 194, paragraph 194. So then I take it what happens here is that you follow up with Mr. Cooper of the city to find whether they have any further, or they've got any comments on the suggested changes to the report.
Yes, that's what it appears, yes.
And you're waiting to hear back that the version's acceptable so that you can deliver the final report. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And can we please turn to image 80? Um, 207. Yeah, actually, you can leave it that way. Thanks. Just leave it. Just leave. Sorry, take away the call out. Just leave the 2 pages. I think we can read them. For understanding from the title part here is that this is the final version, December 9, 2013. So on December 9, 2013, Mr. Cooper responded to your message saying the go-ahead for the wording, advising that he had received the go-ahead for the wording changes and asking you to proceed to make final copies. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And it looks as though, and the final copies, and if we go over to the next page, and my friend took you to this about the date change, and you made the decision, and the decision was made that the date would not be changed to December. It would be left as October as the final version. That's what happened here?
Yes, that's what happened. Yeah.
Okay. 27. In paragraph 208, you sent Mr. Cooper a PDF of the updated report. Can we please go to Hamilton 41870? Okay. So you write to Steve Cooper saying, please find attached the PDF version of the updated report. The printed reports will follow likely Wednesday. So the cover email doesn't identify this as the final report. Can we please go to it? And I think that is 418710001 is the attachment. Here we go. And can you tell from the front page of this that it is the final report that SEMA delivered to Hamilton?
I can tell because I know that EO5 version was the final report that went out. So it has that notation under the date.
Okay. Can we please turn to the next image? And this report just has the project team identified from SEMA here. There are no signing lines for SEMA on this. Was it the practice in 2013 that SEMA did not sign its final reports?
From my recollection, it depended on the type of report that it was, but it wasn't uncommon that they weren't signed. There is no signature line here. I don't know if the original hard copy was signed or stamped. I'm not sure. It's not reflected in the PDF.
Okay, but if there was signing lines, you would have expected to see, if it was signed, wouldn't you have expected to see signing lines here?
I would expect to see that, yes.
Okay, so does that not indicate to you that probably this version was not signed?
It indicates that, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Those are my questions.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, and I have a few questions for Mr. Appleby. May I proceed?
I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, if we could just take a 2-minute break. There's a matter that has shown up on my screen that I have to deal with. I'm just going to, if you could stand by, Ms. Contractor, I'm just going to delete my video here for a moment.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Ms. Contractor, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Good morning, Mr. Appleby. And my name is Dylan, the contractor and a counsel to the city. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about some of the issues that my friends have asked you about and a couple of new points. And wanted to understand generally the process that SEMA took in preparing its reports. And I take it ultimately, Mr. Appleby, that it would be important that the safety review report that SEMA prepares for its client reflects their opinion on what recommendations could or should be implemented in the study area.
I would agree, yes.
And that includes any recommendations with respect to timelines.
Correct, yes.
And I understand that it's a common practice for SEMA to share drafts of the report with the client and to receive feedback from them on the report.
That's common. I think that's common in the industry, yes.
And as part of that feedback, they may include their prior history with a particular measure and their views about the efficacy, the challenges with implementation, those types of factors.
They could include that stuff, yes, absolutely.
And based on their feedback, I take it that if SEMA agreed with any suggestions that are made by the client, that they would revise the report accordingly?
If we agreed and if it was consistent with our recommendations, then we likely would have no issue revising the report accordingly.
Right. And conversely, if SEMA did not agree, it would not accept those suggestions and implement those provisions.
That's correct.
Right. And so you'd agree with me that SEMA would not include essentially SEMA would not include any recommendations, including recommendations with respect to timeline in its safety review reports that it did not agree with.
I would agree that we would not include that. Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Registrar, could we please go to CIM 8082, image 13? I want to chat now about the objective of the safety review at a high level. And I understand that the objective of that review was to, we can look at the study objectives section there. But it was to review a portion of the Red Hill, determine the safety performance, and recommend viable potential measures that could be implemented to increase the safety performance of drivers. So essentially, SEMA's mandate was to provide its opinion on the safety performance, identify any measures that the city could implement, and a timeline by which the city could implement those measures. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And we heard from Mr. Malone yesterday that the term should be considered has a very specific meaning in traffic and transportation engineering, and that its use is that it's used intentionally by SEMA. And specifically, he indicated that the phrase means that the measure should be done unless there's a reason not to. Is that consistent with your understanding of SEMA's use of the word should be considered?
Yeah, that would be my understanding. That's typical in the industry, especially now.
Okay. And was it typical in 2013, to the best of your recollection?
Yes, I believe it was just before then that in the industry it began to change, where should took on quite a more definitive meaning.
Right. And we see here that the study objective is for recommendations that the city could implement. But of course, if there were measures that the city should implement, SEMA would have identified those as well.
Correct. Yes, those words would have been used in the context of their meeting for sure.
They would have been used in specific ways.
Correct. Yes.
And just to be clear, if should be considered means that the action should be done unless there's a reason not to, could be considered suggests that an action could be done but is not required. Is that fair?
I would say that's fair, yes.
Okay. And if we go to image 4, please, Mr. Registrar. We see here that there are timelines in the timelines associated with the countermeasures that are referenced in the report, and that the timelines are defined. And so short term is defined from 0 to 5 years, medium term 5 to 10 years, and long term is 10 plus years. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. And essentially this means that SEMA recommends that the city consider implementing the short term at some point between 0 and 5 years.
Yes.
Unless the recommendation was a should, in which case it would be the city should recommend or implement that measure between 0 to 5 years. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'd like to chat now about the illumination, continuous illumination on the Red Hill in the context of the 13 report. And we see that for the 13 report and the 15 report, there are a number of progress meetings that SEMA attended with the city, and that after each meeting, the SEMA prepared progress meeting minutes. And I gather, Mr. Appleby, that the purpose of preparing those minutes is to capture the key points of the discussion, any decisions that are made, and any follow-up tasks. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. And if we could go, please, Mr. Registrar, to CIM 8453, which are the meeting minutes for the June 6th meeting. Thank you. And if we look at the line that starts with SEMA needs to be cautious with illumination. might be on the next page. Right. So it's item 4, open discussion. And I believe your evidence yesterday, Mr. Appleby, was that coming out of this meeting on June 6th, you understood that the assessment of continuous illumination, and that is illumination throughout the study area, was part of the scope of work for the 2013 report.
Yes.
And Mr. Registrar, perhaps we could show both pages of the meeting minutes. Thank you. And Mr. Appleby, please take a second to review if you need to, but could you confirm that these minutes reflect all of the follow-up tasks from this meeting to the best of your recollection?
To the best of my recollection, I believe they would, yes.
And if there were directions from the city for SEMA to obtain further information, to speak to anybody else, you'd expect that these minutes would include that.
If there was specific direction for SEMA to follow up, then they would have been noted in these minutes, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Registrar, could we please go to OD 6, image 37? Okay, so and we don't need to call anything out, as long as Mr. Appleby, you can see this paragraph's okay at this size.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm going to be chatting about paragraph 82 and 83 generally. We see that on July 26th, Mr. Malone provides comments on a draft report that you've sent to him, and that's you were taken to it earlier, but at this point, no draft has gone out to the city. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And here, Mr. Malone asks, or states rather, we need to discuss lighting. Is it in scope or not? And here you understood him to mean continuous lighting in the study area?
That would, yes, I believe was my understanding at the time, was continuous lighting or lighting in general. It was very generic in the original scope.
Right. And you understood his email or his statement to mean that he was not clear as to whether continuous illumination was in scope or not?
It certainly appeared that way, yes.
Right.
That's how I would have taken that.
And your response was, and I believe that this was in scope. And again, this refers to continuous lighting in the study area.
It would have been, yes, continuous and any other lighting along the entire study area.
Right. And when you say we could write it out similar to the geometry, given adequate background, if we think this is better. The we referenced in that sentence is SEMA, correct?
I believe that's in relation to SEMA. Yes, we are the authors.
Right. And write it out, and you meant write continuous lighting of the study area out of the report. Is that right?
So, yeah, again, it's poorly worded, I suppose, but the idea was that we would provide explanation in the report as to why it was not in scope, similar to what we had done in relation to the geometry review, in that we weren't reviewing certain aspects of the geometry of the actual road.
Right, but at this point, your understanding is that it is in scope.
Yes, that was my understanding, absolutely, because I wrote that right there.
Right, and so in that second paragraph, you're not referencing any direction from the city with respect to whether it's in scope or not, but you're referencing what SEMA could do, given the use of we there. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I believe my evidence previously was that I hadn't personally received any information from the city one way or the other to myself.
So one way or the other, that you thought that it was in scope, right? So you understood it to be in scope.
Correct.
So you hadn't received anything from the city that would exclude it from the scope.
At that point, I had not.
Right. And the second line in that second paragraph, which states, we received no comment from the city on our presentation that we sent over. And I just want to take you through a couple of documents with respect to that statement. So if we could go to, well, let me ask you first, given that this is July 26th, the presentation you're referring to is the one that was provided on July 3rd. Is that right?
I believe that would be the one, yes.
Okay. And perhaps, Mr. Registrar, could we go to that presentation, which is at HAM 51990 and image 29 specifically? And this is the slide on page 29 from that July presentation, and it states, full illumination on ramps and freeways meets the TAC and MTO warrants. And again, here, this is referring to illumination for the entire study area, correct?
It is, yes. So full illumination isn't the technically correct term, but that's what it is relating to, yes. Here,
right. That's why, because that would be continuous.
Correct, yes.
Okay, and if we go to, perhaps if we can keep that page up and also go to HAM 51991, which are the minutes from that meeting.
Sorry, Council, do you mind just repeating the call out for me?
Of course, HAM 51991.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And let me just adjust something here. Oh. Sorry, folks, I'm just having a bit of a glitch. Okay. And if we look at under presentation, which might be on the next page. No, just give me 1 second, sorry. The page that we were just at. Yeah, maybe let's call that out. Right, so thanks very much. The paragraph that starts with 4 geometric design aspects. You see that?
I do, yes.
Right, so this says, for geometric design aspects, SEMA should include text in the report describing the design philosophy and not specifically examine design features in the report. And so this reflects the city's view not to examine design features in the 2013 report. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And if we look under costs, which I think that might be on the next page, perhaps, Mr. Registrar. Right, so at the bottom of this page, thank you. It says SEMA will include illumination recommendations in the report. MF indicated that SEMA should use MTO costing information rather than, go to the next page, please, Hamilton costs due to type of lighting. And again, that references the illumination there is to continuous illumination or full illumination on the study area, correct?
At the time, that was my understanding, yes.
Right. And so here, other than the guidance provided by MF, who I believe is Mr. Field, regarding costing, these minutes don't reflect any comment from the city on the PowerPoint with respect to illumination. And again, we can pull up both pages, Mr. Appleby, just to be fair to you, and so you have a chance to review. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see any reference to that, no.
Right, and certainly there was no reference to SEMA not reviewing illumination in the way that the minutes captured the city's view regarding geometric design review. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And if we could go now, please, Mr. Registrar, to OD6, image 37. Back to where we were. So again, when you say we received no comment from the city on our presentation that we sent over, and specifically the presentation that you're referring to is the last slide that we just went to, which said that full illumination, i.e. continuous illumination, and on ramps and freeway meets the TAC and MPO warrants. That's what you're referring to there?
Yes.
And when you say no comment, you're referring to the fact that the city did not have any comments with respect to that last slide, as we just spoke about.
Yeah, that would be my understanding of that. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. And I think you've indicated that between this email that we're looking at here, where you respond to Mr. Malone, excuse me, and the next email, CIM 8124, and perhaps Mr. Registrar, we can have both these pages up. I can't see the second page. I don't know if others can. It's just, sorry, so it's just a black screen for me, other than the OD page.
Sorry, Council, I don't think it's 8214. I think it's a different.
My apologies. Give me 1 second.
Is it 8423?
It may be. Let me just double check in 1 moment. It is 8124. Sorry, so it is 8124, CIM 8124. Oh, nice, okay. So Ms. Lawrence took you to this email noting that paragraph 1 there where you're asking, where you ask your colleague to remove overall lighting from the report, and I believe you confirmed overall lighting again references continuous lighting, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And between the email at paragraph 83, where you between the email at paragraph 33 and the email you send to Mr. Nolet, I think you said you don't recall having any conversations with city staff. In terms of, you don't recall any conversations between city staff.
I don't recall having any conversations with city staff, no.
Right. And given your role on this project, which I understood to be a conduit between city staff and the technical team and partners on the file, I take it part of your responsibility was the sharing of information between the two groups. Is that fair?
Yes, anything that would have come through me, I would share as necessary. Absolutely.
Right. So if you would have had a call or an email from the city between the July 26th or the email at paragraph 83 and the email from July 29th, you would have sent an email to your colleagues to relay the city's comments, correct?
That would be my common practice had I received something, yes.
And I take it you haven't seen any emails between you and city staff, or you and your colleagues from the period of time in between these two emails. The first where you send Mr. Malone an email noting that you understood lighting to be in scope, and the second email where you ask your colleague to remove continuous lighting from the report. Nothing to suggest that there was any communication with the city between these two.
I don't recall seeing any emails related to that going from myself to the city, no.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Registrar, could we please go to 8082.001, the 2013 SEMA report? And image 14 specifically, please. Can we call out that entire section just so it's a bit bigger? So this section talks about the limitations of the 2013 study. And I want to understand a bit more specifically about what this says. And so if we look at the second paragraph, which says the design choices on the facility were intimately linked to approvals. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And then it goes on to say in the next paragraph, because of the unique area and because of the costs associated with building a roadway on the escarpment, the city identified several design refinements to the alignment of the roadway within the valley. These refinements, quote, consider environmental benefits, driver safety, and construction costs. So, sorry. What this says is that design refinements were made on the Red Hill, and that those refinements were responsive to the unique area of the Red Hill Valley, the construction costs, the environmental benefits, and driver safety. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what that quote says. Absolutely.
Okay. And then it goes on to give specific examples of those refinements. And we see that the third plus sign says restricting illumination to the intersections and on and off ramps. It does not say that an environmental assessment prohibited illumination continued illumination, on the Red Hill, correct?
That specific bullet does not say that, no.
Right, but not just that bullet, but the paragraph above it, right?
No, that's a very short quote taken from that document. I can't say today whether that document specifies that or not.
Right. So, but generally what this paragraph is stating that the Red Hill, there were design refinements made, and those refinements were reflective of a number of factors, including environmental benefits, driver safety, construction costs. Nowhere does it say, and I'm not just referencing the quote, that entire paragraph, does not state that illumination was restricted because of environmental, because of prohibitions in the environmental assessment, correct?
That statement doesn't say that.
And if we go to the footnote 4, just below, that is the Laura report that you were referring to earlier. Laura Consulting?
Yep.
Right. And I think my friend asked you how you may have obtained the report, and I think you said either it was publicly available or the city provided to you, but clearly you had a copy of it before before you finalized the 2013 report.
Yes.
And if we go to, if we could register, keep that page up and go to HAM 2638. So this is the LoRa report. And if we go to we go to image 8. Provides a general description. It's a very long report, so I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but the general purpose of the report and a background of the consultation process is provided on this page. And while you're reviewing that, Mr. Appleby, I'll just note that this report will be Exhibit 63.
Thank you.
And so the kind of background of the report is provided here. And then if we go to image 87, and if we can pull out the first, that's strange, my 87 is slightly different. Sorry, if we can go back 2 pages, please. And if we can call out the first row of that table. So you see here on the left, it says serious potential impacts are not addressed in either report. Natural areas adjacent to the indirect impact zone will be compromised. And then on the right-hand side, it states, Michael Measure of the Toronto-based Fatal Light Awareness Program was contacted regarding the possible effects of expressway light on wildlife behavior. He stated that artificial lighting, street lighting, highway light standards, vehicle lights, can affect the breeding habits of birds. However, these effects are difficult to quantify and studies are limited. Mitigation measures should aim to limit usage of light standards to intersections and on and off ramps. Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. Is there a way, Mr. Registrar, to have this section up that you've called out with the section of the report that we were looking at? Even if it's just the far right column. I don't know if you can see that any better, but I guess the point I wanted to make is that the references in the SEMA report, which again aren't to prohibitions in this section with respect to the environmental assessment, but about design refinements made to reflect environmental benefits and construction costs. And the specific site and reference is to this LoRa report, which specifically talks about mitigation measures, as a result of which continuous illumination, or rather illumination should be restricted to interchanges and off ramps. And so this is, and there's a few other references in the report, but this report supports what is described in the study limitation section that we see here.
Yes.
If we could go to image 58 of the 2013 SEMA report that you have up already, Mr. Registrar. And we can take down the Laura report. Okay, and could we please call out the high friction pavement, that first paragraph? So this recommendation or the reference rather to install high friction pavement in the report was made with respect to ramp 6. And the last line of that paragraph states that the city could consider installing this treatment on approach to and through the curb at the end of the ramp. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
And it does not state that the city should install high friction pavement, correct?
Correct. Yeah, says could.
Right. And you agreed with me earlier that SEMA is intentional about its use of should and could.
Correct, yes.
And if we could go to image 66, please. And if we look at this, so this is the summary of countermeasures broken down into ramp segments. And for ramp 6, you'll see that one of the recommendations is to install high friction pavement and that it's listed as a short-term countermeasure, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so the guidance in the SEMA report with respect to high friction pavement is that the city could consider installing high friction pavement on ramp 6 at some point from November 2014, which is when the report, or sorry, 13 rather, which is when the report was finalized, and November 2018, which is 5 years. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Okay, if we could go to OD paragraph 6, I'm sorry, OD 6, image 35. So Ms. Lawrence took you to the email at paragraph 76. And I believe you agreed that that you were being informed about Golder Associates' work on the Red Hill as a result of the friction testing recommendation that was included in some of the earlier drafts of the report and discussed at the progress meeting.
Yes, that's my understanding of that. Yeah.
And given what we discussed earlier about about your role on this project being a conduit of information, you would have shared this information with the technical team and the partners on the SEMA side working on the 2013 report.
It would have been my typical practice to share that information, yes.
Right. And if we go to CIM 10011, you were taken to this email as well. And I take it that when you received this email from Mr. Malone, where he says FYI in review, you would have reviewed Mr. Moore's note or the email from Mr. Moore below?
I believe I would have reviewed it, yes.
Right. And Mr. Registrar, if we can put up the second page of that. Perfect. And you see that the email that Mr. Moore forwards to Mr. Malone is an email from Dr. Uzarowski from Golder Associates, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I take it, Mr. Appleby, that at this point, you did not recall that the city had invited SEMA to reach out to Golder in 2013 if they had any questions about friction testing.
No, I wouldn't have recalled that probably.
Right, and so you didn't share with or remind Mr. Malone of the city's invitation to contact Golder from 2013.
I don't believe I did. I don't recall that specifically, no.
Those are all my questions for you, Mr. Appleby. Thanks for your time today.
Okay. Dufferin and MTO have no questions.
That's correct. I mean, unless they pop up on the screen.
Okay. And Ms. Lawrence, anything further?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to take a short 5-minute break just to confirm my notes and if I have any questions in re-exam. In any event, I suspect I'll be quite brief.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll return at not quite 10 to 5 to 12.
Thank you, Mr. Appleby. I have a few questions in reexamination. Registrar, can you bring up HAM 8082? Apologies, that is not the document that I wanted. Just give me a second. I've done it again. Can you bring up 8082 period 0001, please? Thank you. And if you could go to it's internal page 2. I believe it is image 8. Thank you. Mr. Appleby, you recall that Ms. Contractor asked you questions about the reference to the third paragraph and the 3 crosses, 3 X's?
Yes, I do.
She also took you to the Laura report,
That's correct.
and she asked you, or she put to you, the Laura report supports what is described in the study limitation section that we see here. That was her question, and she was referring to those paragraphs, the third and those X's. Do you remember she asked those questions?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And in response to her assertion or her proposition to you that the Laura report supports what's described here, you said correct. What recollection do you have about what you did personally in 2013 to confirm that the Laura report supports the language that's set out in the study limitation section?
I personally don't recall what I did with respect to that. I see that there's some quotations here and notations, footnotes, but I don't recall what my involvement in that was personally.
Did you draft this section 2.2 of, this is draft E04?
I don't recall if I drafted this specifically. Most of the report was not drafted by me. I did some updates, but I can't say for sure.
Did you personally review the Laura report in 2013?
I don't recall personally reviewing that report.
Thank you. As a more general question, amongst those on the SEMA team, were you the only conduit of information between SEMA and the city?
No, I was not.
Thank you. Those are my questions in re-exam.
Okay. Well, if that completes the questioning, Mr. Appleby, thank you very much for appearing before the inquiry. You're excused.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And then with the rest of us, I think that completes what we're going to do today as well. So we'll stand adjourned until Monday morning at 9:30. And I invite everyone to have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.